Sometimes there's games that do so badly, the franchise dies off and the studio goes with it. But every once in a while, there are games that perform pretty bad, but then somehow, the studio can pivot away and they just put the game series to rest for a bit. And surprisingly, the game miraculously makes a return years later. Today, we thought it'd be interesting if we talked about game series that almost died, that were so bad they brought their series to the brink and then somehow managed to stay alive afterwards. One of the easiest examples that comes to mind is the Metal Gear series. Metal Gear was kind of like a beloved franchise for a long time. After Hideo Kojima had a falling out with Konami decided, hey, we can continue on utilizing the Metal Gear IP, and they released Metal Gear Survive, which is kind of a weird game. It was like Metal Gear, but not at all, and there's like zombies or something, and the gameplay is not only nothing like a Metal Gear game, but it's also just not even a good game on its own. And that was a wild time. Right after that, Metal Gear would go on to have a hiatus for quite some time before just recently it's been announced that there's going to be some Metal Gear remasters coming in the future, meaning that the series is finally to some degree coming back, and we expect there to be more in the future, but one of the longest hiatuses for a Metal Gear game we've ever seen. But what about more dramatic examples that exist out there as well?
Okay. But today's video is sponsored by Cook Unity, the first chef-to-you platform that brings freshly prepared restaurant-quality meals straight to your door. With over 350 chef-made options each week, including dishes crafted by James Beard Award winners and Food Network stars, we get to enjoy high-quality meals without the cooking hassle. We've been trying Cook Unity meals, and honestly, they're kind of a game changer. No more stressing about what to cook. You just heat it and eat, and we wanted to show you these 3 meals here we're pretty hyped about. First up, we got Filipino-style spaghetti bologna by Chef Stacy Baran. How do I say the name?
Stacy Baring.
The flavor is pretty unreal. Then there's Chef Santos Jimenez. He's got the chicken breast with spinach cream sauce, and Chef Esther Choi's grilled Korean barbecue chicken. Each dish is packed with fresh, high-quality ingredients that make every bite amazing. What we love most about Cook Unity is the variety. You can choose meals to fit your dietary needs, whether you're vegan, gluten-free, or just want something delicious and convenient. Plus, the meals arrive chilled, not frozen, so they're fresh and ready in a minute. So if you're ready to try restaurant-quality meals at home, check out Cook Unity. Head to this link here, or click on the link below, and use our code RSSLOTH50 for 50% off your first order. Trust us, your taste buds will thank you.
Let's talk about Halo Infinite as a very easy example. Halo Infinite at launch might have seemed like a pretty cool and well-rounded Halo game, which was different from the past 2 Halo games before that, but man, did it fail as a live service game for literally like a year. Just nothing was going on. This was supposed to be a big deal. Not only was Halo Infinite supposed to originally be a launch title for the Xbox Series, which was kind of an important deal. I mean, like, the game is on the box for the new Xbox at the time. The game got delayed, but damn, was Halo Infinite supposed to be the time that Halo finally got things right? And then they dropped the ball. Okay, was Microsoft ever really serious about shutting down Halo and 343 Industries? No, but they definitely were ready to fully clean house. There was a lot of staff at 343 Industries that was fired or coincidentally happened to leave around the same time that these massive layoffs were happening. Bonnie Ross, the head of 343 Industries, September 2022, gone. Tom French, the former Halo multiplayer creative director, gone. David Berger, the director of engineering, gone. Jerry Hook, the design head, gone. Frank O'Connor, franchise creative director, gone. Joseph Staten, a legend from the Halo franchise from the Bungie glory days, he's brought in as a PR piece to gain some goodwill with the community and then is used as a mouthpiece to deliver bad news about the state of Halo Infinite to fans. Does he finally get a fair shot at getting to lead a Halo project beginning to end? Nope. Gone. After Halo Infinite's release, Paul Bertone was brought on, another Bungie veteran who worked on a ton of Halo games, like the good ones. He's there for a few months and then boom, he's gone as well. 95 staff members at 343 Industries all just wiped away. And then, after a little cool down period, 343's like, hey, we're not 343 anymore. We're Halo. Yeah, you guys like that, don't you? For the last 2 years, we've been think tanking about what Halo's going to look like when we switch to the Unreal Engine. Here's some concept visuals. We're not 343, even though we're in the same office and, the same leadership, still Microsoft. We're Halo. I think this was literally the closest Microsoft has ever gone to just straight up shutting down like the studio for Halo. I mean, they cleaned house, and now it's funny how Halo Studios bragging about in the trailer that they're hiring people. It's like, oh yeah, they're hiring people. We're growing. Isn't that great? It's like, okay, but you fired a lot of people. Some people who were actually good at their job. Nonetheless, Halo Infinite is just one example, and there's other studios that have come even closer to the brink of just completely, engulfing in flames and the series to be dead to never be revisited again than what Halo dealt with. And we want to look at those because some of these stories are actually really, really wild, especially if you haven't heard about them. So Flight Simulator is something interesting. I never realized that Flight Simulator had such a weird and turbulent development course. Do you get it, Luke?
Turbulent, dude?
I was watching you on screen waiting for you to start laughing with the whole turbulent joke, and you were just...
Say it again.
They had a turbulent development. There you go. When it comes to Flight Simulator, there was a studio named Aces Game Studio, and they had been working on a lot of games over the years, but Flight Simulator was kind of their biggest project, I guess. Before the flight simulators that Aces worked on, there was a couple other teams that had worked on it. Microsoft had done a couple on their own, just as Microsoft software, I guess. But for the more gaming angled ones, it was Aces. And they did Flight Simulator 4, and they did Flight Simulator X. It was cool. I think Flight Simulator X was really loved by the flight sim community, I guess. But then Microsoft ended up doing some layoffs shortly after the release of Flight Simulator X, likely due to the recession. And essentially the entire team that worked on the Flight Simulator games was let go. Then after they shut down the studio, fired everybody, Microsoft was like, hey, Flight Sim was kind of a banger series. Why don't we try to do something new with that? And in 2012, they released Microsoft Flight, not, Flight Simulator, just Microsoft Flight. They got the now Coalition, the Gears of War studio. Before they were doing that, they were just called Microsoft Game Studios Vancouver. And they worked on this Microsoft Flight game. And it was not supposed to be a part of the Flight Simulator series, but it very much was supposed to be the successor. It would use the Games for Windows Live feature that everyone loved from the Windows Vista onwards days. Nonetheless, Microsoft Flight released and people didn't really care for it. It was a watered down flight sim experience. And it kind of just scored middle of the road 5 out of 10s across the board. And they supported it for a little while, and then Microsoft decided to cancel any more future support on that. And they're like, okay, what else can we do? So they found a different studio, the ones known for doing Train Sim World, which is Dovetail Games, to try to distribute the game on Steam. They supported the game. They did some bug fixes and stuff like that. That was kind of it. But Microsoft was like, hey, Flight Sim, surprisingly still popular all these years later. Maybe we can make some more money off of them. So still partnered up with Dovetail. They let them make a Flight Sim game, and they made Flight Sim World, kind of like how they did their Train Sim World. And I guess that wasn't too popular because they shut it down just a year later. And Microsoft would then look for different options to try to revitalize Flight Simulator eventually. But as you can see, they were doing half-hearted attempts of continuing the Flight Simulator series for quite some time. And they even tried to completely kill off Flight Simulator by themselves with Microsoft Flight, only for it to fail. And then they kind of said, okay, actually, you guys just go publish our old game with all of its content, and we'll just be fine there. They did eventually find a brand new team to take over with Microsoft Flight Simulator, and they used the whole Microsoft Azure stuff, some crazy real world AI technology to make locations realistic. And finally, after all this time, it seems like the Flight Simulator series has turned around and revived itself after being dormant for so long. From essentially the last mainline flight sim game before 2020 was in 2006. Pretty cool that they're able to make a big turnaround after 14 years, and we're getting a new flight sim in a couple of weeks. So I don't know. I'm excited for that. I'm terrible at Flight Sim. I am awful. However, I love that game.
He is really terrible at it.
I'm not that bad.
I mean,
Do you guys remember the series Dead Island? I mean, some of you probably know because there was a newer game released within the last couple of years, but prior to that, Dead Island was going through a kind of a rocky road for something that was like relatively a newer series, or there weren't that many entries in the series is what I'm trying to say. Dead Island 1, released in 2011, which is crazy to think how far back Dead Island 1 came out, and it was kind of a solid game. I at least enjoyed it. Reviews were a little more mixed. I mean, they did hype the game up with a crazy awesome like CGI trailer, and like this isn't reflective of what the game's about at all, but like it was a solid, like I think at least 7 out of 10 experience, especially for 2011 standards. Might not hold up as well today, but it still was kind of a fun game. But here's the thing, Dead Island would go on and sell over 5 million units, which is really good for a game back in the early 2010s. But what would result with a start to maybe what could become a potentially successful series fell apart very shortly after the release of Dead Island. A lot of people did want a Dead Island 2, but they wanted like a new game, a sequel, not necessarily a whatever Dead Island Riptide ended up being. It's really interesting to me how that in less than 2 years, Dead Island Riptide was already on store shelves. A game that was essentially a direct sequel to Dead Island, but it didn't, earn the title Dead Island 2. They would save that for a future project. Dead Island Riptide was the true form sequel, but I guess it wasn't like big enough to be a full-on sequel. The story of the game was simple. After the big ending of the first Dead Island game, you're now stranded at a new island, and the same stuff's going on, except you're here instead. The game was heavily criticized for the fact that the game didn't fix a lot of the problems from the first game, and didn't really add anything at all new to the gameplay side of things. And I mean, the game was fine, I guess. It's mostly just the fact that the game was kind of a, rehash of the first game, just with like a couple of differently shaped locales, but essentially more of the same exact things. The aesthetics were the same, the gameplay was pretty much the same. There wasn't a lot going on here. Even more interestingly enough, they decided to discount the price at launch. Maybe they knew deep down that this game was more of like a standalone DLC than an actual full-on sequel, the way that they had been trying to market it without calling it a full-on sequel or putting the number 2 on it. So they released it at still the expensive $49.99, but yeah, kind of weird that they didn't just like double down and make it $60 because they were trying to be like, this is a new experience. They said it was because of the end of the console life, which I don't necessarily buy, but I also remember seeing this game at very, very heavily discounted prices a few months after the game's launch. I think they really shot themselves in the foot with Dead Island because they were trying to push out a new game way sooner than a new game needed to be pushed out, especially with no real innovation or work done in expanding the game series and making things better or bigger than ever before. They just wanted to push out essentially a game that was very, very, very much like the previous game, but just like kind of a slightly different experience. There was some cool things like you could carry over your data from the previous game, but I mean, okay. I don't know. This whole thing just seemed really confusing because it almost seemed like at the beginning it was supposed to just be like a standalone expansion, but then they were like, no, this is a sequel game that's just not $60. I don't know. It was weird, but they were going big with the Dead Island series, or what they wanted to do with Dead Island. They wanted a comic book series that they tried to do. They did a novelization of the game's storyline that released alongside the game. There was even a film announced in 2011 where Lionsgate had acquired the rights to develop a film based off of the trailer alone, not even the game. Something called Occupant Entertainment and Deep Silver would produce and finance the film together, and it was expected to begin production in 2015. Where is it? Also, around the time that Dead Island Riptide was getting ready to release, a new Dead Island game called Dead Island Epidemic was announced, which was going to be a MOBA game. Yeah, multiplayer online battle arena. I never knew this actually existed. But hear me out. This game actually went into Steam in early access. They invited players to participate for the final stages of development. The game was free to play. There was an open beta phase, and it was canceled. Yep. Surprise, surprise. This was also kind of like a half-baked idea. Within a few months of Epidemic getting announced and Dead Island Riptide releasing, there also was the official announcement for Dead Island 2, which was kind of the precursor to this series almost completely dying, I think. And also another game called Escape Dead Island
Island was announced, which did actually release the following year, though it was kind of something completely different. Once they had kind of exhausted all the things that were like in active development, the Dead Island series would kind of be hit with like a giant stop sign. Like they were like, okay, hold on, we gotta pump the brakes for a second because we might have bit off more than we can chew with thinking about the future of Dead Island, because I don't think people liked Dead Island Riptide. Or I guess we can also say that this MOBA game might have also contributed to Dead Island literally almost becoming a dead game series. What's really interesting to me is that if you dig into the lore a little bit behind the studios and the publishers that were like directly working on the Dead Island series, there was kind of a disconnect as to what the scope of Dead Island needed to be and what the future of Dead Island needed to be. You see, Techland, the developer for Dead Island and the same developer that kind of had to rush together Dead Island Riptide, actually had a really big and ambitious project using the feedback that they had learned from Dead Island to work on that they wanted to incorporate into the Dead Island series. However, the publisher, Deep Silver at the time, didn't seem to agree with the ambitious goals that the Dead Island team had, and Techland technically didn't actually have like full-on creative control. The IP, Dead Island, belonged to the publisher, Deep Silver. So Techland just kind of threw their hands up in the air and they're like, hey, you know what? Let's just develop our own game with these ideas that we've learned and incorporate these new ideas and get a different publisher that'll let us do whatever we want and give us some creative control. And they paired up with Warner Brothers, and boom, Dying Light would end up coming out of the Dead Island development, I guess, technically. I really don't fully understand this one because it's just weird to me how Deep Silver must have obviously really wanted a new Dead Island game to go out quickly because they greenlit and published Dead Island Riptide, which was, you know, not that outstanding compared to the first one. But like all of a sudden, now that that game is out and didn't do as well, they now want to overstep and start like making creative demands as to the future of the series. An interesting like change of importance to like what the goals of the series ended up being. This led Deep Silver into having the issue of announcing Dead Island 2 but not having a studio to actually work on Dead Island 2. Originally announced in 2014 and set for a 2016 release date, and Deep Silver, not having a studio to work with, ended up listening to pitches from other studios that wanted to take on the Dead Island game series, and they chose to go with Jaeger Development, who was known for their combat flight simulation games in the early 2000s, and eventually they did put out Spec Ops: The Line, so they had like one decent game under their belt. Now they did show off gameplay in 2014. It did look like it was set in California, but it also looked very much like the first Dead Island game and Dead Island Riptide. And they did say that the game was going to feature 4 playable characters, but they only showed 2 off at the demo. And it seemed like there was supposed to be 8-player co-op at one point. So people were interested, I guess. They're like, oh, like, I mean, it's something new setting. It's in California, though. How's California an island? For this to be called Dead Island, I don't know. In 2015, when people were expecting more information about the game, or, you know, just to see what was going on, Deep Silver announced that they ended up dropping Jaeger altogether and that they would move on to another unnamed developer. The managing director of the studio later would go back and say that Jaeger and Deep Silver's respective visions of the project fell out of alignment, whatever that means, and Jaeger Productions filed for insolvency in July of 2015. In 2016, they announced that Sumo Digital was taking over development, and Deep Silver kept reiterating, hey, this game is still coming out. Well, let's be honest now, after everything that happened with Dead Island Riptide, it's probably pretty clear that things really almost just like were thrown out the window for Dead Island altogether. Losing the original developers and like kind of shooting themselves in the foot with like a mediocre Dead Island game as the first sequel definitely didn't help things. And then all of the development hell, people thought the series was dead and that just Dead Island 2, like they just forgot to announce that they were canceling it. Like seriously, there was conversations Luke and I had where we legitimately were like, did they just forget to cancel it? Like what is going on? But no, they were developing the game, that's for sure. With Sumo Digital in charge, things would go on for a while, and once again, nothing would ever be shown. But then in August of 2019, THQ Nordic, the publisher that took over Deep Silver's projects when Deep Silver went under, announced that they were moving development for the game again and changed hands to Dambuster Studios, which was an internal studio of Deep Silver. Honestly, I don't think anybody realistically thought that this game was going to come out until maybe 2022, when they actually started like talking about it again and showed things again. And yeah, Dead Island 2 lived. They did finally make a comeback, and the game was
pretty much as mid as the first Dead Island. I mean, the first Dead Island wasn't bad, and I think Dead Island 2 was just as okay. Like, it was a 7 out of 10 game, I think. I think it probably was substantially better than Dead Island Riptide, and that's a good plus. But yeah, I mean, it's a solid game. I think you could have fun playing Dead Island 2. I don't think it's like the most groundbreaking zombie experience of all time, but I mean, like, get some friends together and play it, and it's gonna be better than Redfall. But this is what we're talking about here. Like, this game series literally was on the brink of death multiple times. When you're, unassigning studios to work on the game because you're not happy, and the series hadn't been around as long as some of these longer lasting series, it's not really a good sign. I'm very surprised Dead Island 2 released, or that they actually still went through and it didn't get canceled along the way, because so many games that were way more ambitious end up getting canceled for dumb things, and Dead Island 2 somehow I think they forgot to cancel it. That's still my theory. And then the game just appeared out of nowhere.
When Fable The Journey came out with Kinect integration in 2012, it was treated as like a mainline Fable game. It kind of killed the franchise at that point because nobody gave a damn about the Kinect.
I mean, the Kinect sold well. It just, the games weren't very, fun. There was the one game with, the river rafting mini game. That was pretty fun. But outside of that...
Or, jump on the E3
you have to jump, and then, it takes a picture of you while you're jumping on the river raft, and that was cool.
But anyways, Fable The Journey was supposed to be a big follow-up for the Fable series, and obviously it wasn't. And then when they announced Fable Legends 4 years later, the 4-player RPG, online RPG that was set before the first game, it completely had the studio fall apart, and then shortly after they would close down. We got the reboot announcement, which is also in development hell, so we'll see what's going on with Fable, but I guess it's not Danny anymore.
There were a few other things I think that contributed to Fable's inevitable downfall, like Peter Molyneux. Just everything that he would ever say.
He left after The Journey, though.
Yeah, because he worked on Project Milo. But wasn't there some stuff where before he left, he was he had a couple of public, or not public, but at his studio breakdowns where he was screaming at people and stuff. But it is a shame because I think Fable Legends probably could have been a pretty fun game. I think it was dumb they weren't working on Fable 4, and that wasn't Microsoft should have just had them working on that instead. But I don't know, Fable Legends kind of looked like an okay experience. It's weird it got scrapped that close to the finish line. They were doing alphas and stuff already with public testing.
But also it was I guess way too late. It was 4-5 years after The Journey, and the whole franchise was just imploding. Also, they did all those spin-offs, the card game, the pub games, you know what I mean? The
right.
golf game. And it's just devalued the franchise overall.
Yeah, I think the Kinect one really devalued it the most. And then on top of that, I do think it's interesting. Microsoft probably just felt like they didn't want to do anything with Fable and shut it down, which was such a weird choice because Microsoft obviously changed their mind shortly later. And I think Phil Spencer even said that shutting down Lionhead probably wasn't the answer. So instead, they would have to find a whole new studio to revive the franchise because they literally almost killed the franchise off themselves. And now we'll have to see what Fable has in the future.
Now we'll have to see what the racing studio can cook up with this RPG game.
The Forza guys. Let's see how it goes. So the Mass Effect trilogy was already, pretty popular across the board. I think people, for the most part, liked all of the 3 main games. But there was this little game that came out called Mass Effect Andromeda, and man, did that game mark a shift in quality of games. I think people were not as used to games being so unpolished at launch when Mass Effect Andromeda came out. It was already starting to happen more and more, but Mass Effect Andromeda really was just not in a good state when it launched. There was a lot of work still needing to be done. The story was weird also, but besides the story, there was just a lot of technical issues. The main character looked kind of scary in some of those cutscenes. I think ultimately Mass Effect Andromeda put Mass Effect in a bad spot. I think we could have seen more Mass Effect entries had Andromeda not just been a complete mess altogether. There were updates later that maybe made Mass Effect Andromeda a little bit better, but it was nothing that compared to the quality that the original Mass Effect trilogy had, and I think fans could see that. So Mass Effect died, and RIP to that. They would try to cook up some other things at BioWare. They would do Anthem. And that's dead now. And then they did the Mass Effect trilogy, which shows that there are fans and supporters of the original Mass Effect games if they're done well, because I think the trilogy did decently.
Right. And they have a sequel in the works.
Have they shown anything off about it?
Yeah, there's little teasers and some concept art and stuff.
Oh, concept art, my favorite
pre-launch reveal?
It's just like a character walking down some ship hallway, and then it says Mass Effect.
Oh boy. Do we know what the name of the game's going to be?
Untitled Mass Effect sequel.
Can you imagine if they just like released it as that?
Honestly, better name than Andromeda.
You know what every Nintendo Switch owner must have thought in, when was it, 2019, 2020, when Cooking Mama Cookstar came out? Man, I just wish there was a game that mined Bitcoin in the background. That's not actually what happened with the game. Cooking Mama did not secretly turn your Switch into a Bitcoin mining device for some secret company or some secret project, though there were performance issues that were plaguing the game that was making like a lot of people's Nintendo Switches run hot, which contributed to these rumors popping up when the game released, tied to a couple of other interesting issues, like some copyright issues on who actually retained the rights to the Cooking Mama brand, which resulted in the game being taken off of the store shortly after its release, which then, you know, further those rumors that it was secretly mining Bitcoin. And then there was like internal documents from this developer publisher that they did want to do stuff with like cryptocurrency mining in games. But once again, there's no actual evidence pointing to the fact that Cooking Mama Cookstar was mining any types of Bitcoin in the background. But I don't know, when you think Cooking Mama, you don't think like nefarious crypto schemes, do you? Overall, Cooking Mama Cookstar had a couple of interesting things going for it. After it was initially taken down in 2020, it would come back in 2021 briefly. The game would be taken down again, and then finally the game would be revamped as a completely different game called Yum Yum Cookstar, which would release on Xbox, PlayStation, Switch. There might even be like some mobile Cooking Mama stuff going on. But Yum Yum Cookstar was essentially just Cooking Mama Cookstar, but with a different like cast of characters, and there was like some voice acting and stuff in it. Overall, just a slightly better experience. But yeah, it's just crazy to think about the whole Cooking Mama Cookstar arc and how dramatic it was because people didn't know what was going on with the game. But the truth of it was just the game wasn't that good. And it got like 3 out of 10s across the board. So rest in peace, Cooking Mama. We still don't know what's going on with you.
They got cooked, dude.
He got cooked. You wouldn't really think that the Destroy All Humans game would end up resulting in so much collapse for a game series, but there were 3 studios that had worked on the 4 games that originally released back in the day. And honestly, the Destroy All Humans game kind of had a cool vibe or cool idea. It was doing something different, and I think a lot of people were interested in that. Maybe that's why the first couple of games did well, but man, THQ wanted these games pumped out on a yearly basis, sometimes even more frequently, and the franchise fatigue set in very fast. So back in the day, there's 3 studios, right? All of them are now closed. It seemed like back then, anything that Destroy All Humans touched would end up closing. The sweet kiss of death. Okay, so the first Destroy All Humans game, along with the sequel that released 1 year later, were both developed by Pandemic Studios and published by THQ. And both the first game and the sequel game that Pandemic Games also would work on would do okay. They scored like 7 out of 10s across the board, pretty fair, but a lot of people were interested in the games. But I think in general, THQ really wasn't doing too hot during the beginning of the middle to late 2000s, during a time where THQ probably should had acquired the Pandemic team. EA ended up swooping in and acquiring Pandemic instead. So, in turn, what ended up happening was THQ retained the rights to the Destroy All Humans franchise, and all of the developers would be swooped in to work on some other EA-related projects. Now, Pandemic ended up surviving a little bit longer, and I don't think their closure was a direct result of Destroy All Humans like the other studios we'll talk about, and Pandemic Games would go on to create Mercenaries 2 World in Flames, The Lord of the Rings Conquest, and The Saboteur, which was kind of a niche game that some people really liked. Though by the time that game already released, Pandemic's main offices had been closed, with most of the staff being laid off, with an exception of like 30 people who were absorbed into EA, and that would be it for Pandemic. But THQ was like, well, we gotta keep the hype going with Destroy All Humans, right? Well, THQ already had another first-party developer studio under their belt, because in 1999 they acquired Locomotive Games, whose biggest claim to fame was maybe Road Rash for the N64. And then after they were acquired by THQ, they made some pretty basic games like Power Rangers, Dino Thunder, and more recently, the team that was still at Locomotive Games were put in charge of making the Cars and Ratatouille games for the PlayStation Portable. So now they had the next big task. take Destroy All Humans, make a third entry in the game series, and release it for the Nintendo Wii, making the debut for the Wii console with Destroy All Humans. They also were supposed to make a PS2 version of the game. However, development made that tricky, so they canceled that. They also were supposed to make a PlayStation Portable version of the game, but development made that tricky, so they canceled that one as well, and it only released on the Wii, and it did not review very well. The game kind of got a lot of middle-of-the-road reviews, 5 out of 10s, some lower, some slightly higher. But hey, that was just the Wii version of the game. There still was a mainline console version game being developed by a different studio that THQ was working with, this one being Sandblast Games, which would release the same year. Destroy All Humans: Path of the Furon. This one's wild. This was the first, new generation of Destroy All Humans games set to release on the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3, though just a month before the game was supposed to release, it was announced that the PlayStation 3 version of the game would be canceled, citing development issues. However, the PlayStation 3 version would still release in Australia and Europe about 3 months later, so I don't know what that was all about, but yeah, the Xbox 360 version did come out in December of 2008. And man, the Destroy All Humans train of hype was already dying here, and the game wasn't very good either. So it was scoring a bunch of 3 out of 10s, a couple 4 out of 10s. There was even a 2 out of 10 out there, which, how do you do that? Wait. PlayStation Official Magazine UK gave it a 1 out of 10. Wow. So not only was the series not having good games, but they also had, fatigue from the series, pumping out all these games on a regular basis. 2 games in 2008. I don't think it was a good idea to try to continue on doing the Destroy All Humans game, especially as frequently as they were already trying to do. It was a really weird decision on THQ's part. So instead of THQ taking ownership for their bad decisions, they pulled the classic video game industry move and took it out on the employees. In November 2008, it was announced by THQ that both Locomotive Games and Sandblast Games would be shutting down. It's kind of tragic, but they were like, yep, there's no future with this series. Also, some collateral damage having these other companies work on them, so they're going to. Kind of a shame that it was handled this way. And honestly, that pretty much seemed like the future of Destroy All Humans was set in stone. There would not be anything else for Destroy All Humans. Right? The franchise was definitely dead. But no, in a weird turn of events, THQ ended up going bankrupt a couple of years later. It was a whole big deal. They ended up getting acquired. THQ Nordic is now a company, and those rights to Destroy All Humans would bleed over to Nordic, and THQ Nordic would still have the rights to Destroy All Humans. So they were like, hey, let's get one of our own studios to do the whole remaster thing, and let's re-release that game again and then see what we could do with the franchise moving forward. So they got Black Forest Games, who is crazy in itself, actually. This studio, which opened back in 2012, started off by doing a Kickstarter campaign to make a new installment in the Great Giana Sisters series? Giana Sisters? I don't know how to pronounce it. If you don't know what this game series is, it was a Mario knockoff from way back in the day. It was for the Commodore 64, the Amiga, and all these other really old gaming systems, but not Nintendo systems. But they made the game intentionally look like Mario so that, they could get some more appeal, more sales. And they ended up releasing the game without, having the rights. And allegedly, Nintendo wrote them a letter, not with straight up legal action yet, which is surprising for Nintendo, but they threatened, that they would pursue legal action if they continue to sell the game. So they ended up pulling the game from stores, doing a recall, but the game was still really publicly available, and it was kind of a bootleg game. This was the game that they wanted to revive for whatever reason. Hey, you know what? More power to them, because they did end up crowdfunding $150,000, and it probably is partially due to the fact that some of the developers worked on the DS revival of the game series too. A few games would release, and then they would actually partner up with the revived Acclaim to do a Bubsy game with Bubsy the Woolies Strike Back. Who would have thought Bubsy would return in 2017? That was wild. The game, low-key, I think is just a reskin of the Giana Sisters games. Not exactly. We can tell a lot of the technology was reused across the board. So a studio that's known for reviving kind of dead and forgotten series, but series that might have a niche following, THQ felt like they were the perfect team to look at the Destroy All Humans series, and they went ahead and made a pretty pretty competent remake. I don't think anybody was like too overly offended with how Destroy All Humans ended up coming out. They also did like a multiplayer type experience that technically makes it a new entry in the series with Destroy All Humans Clone Carnage. And then in 2022, they released the sequel to Destroy All Humans, the original one, Destroy All Humans 2 Reprobed, which was like a remaster of the sequel game. And this one's reception was maybe a little more mixed. I don't think maybe everything lined up the way that people expected it to, and it wasn't really like a new experience. I think people were ready for like a brand new Destroy All Humans experience from the ground up, and maybe this one didn't deliver. And then in January 2024, the studio announced that they had to lay off 50% of its team, with creative directors and most of the executives keeping their jobs, but not like the, lower developer level staff members. So it's still to be seen if Destroy All Humans will continue to exist or if it's now dead again. We'll have to find out. The studio is now working on like a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles game, so they're definitely taking a break from Destroy All Humans, but still no sign on Destroy All Humans. What would it be? 4, 5? I'm not sure what number it is, but nonetheless, man, what a rabbit hole that this has been. When Doom 3 originally released, it was actually a little bit of a more controversial game. The game sold really well and generally saw positive reviews, but it definitely was a pretty big deal for the existing Doom community, as the gameplay for Doom 3 was significantly different than the previous Doom games that have released. I mean, Doom 1, Doom 2, the final Doom, then they had like the Doom N64 game. They were pretty consistent in the Doom experience, and Doom 3 was definitely looking graphically different, but the experience and gameplay style was substantially different. And I think because of that, there was just a worse reputation around Doom 3. Doom 3 had a different group of people making the game, and there's just a lot going on behind the scenes with that game. It also took 7 years to make. So it was just kind of like in a weird spot, and I think ultimately a lot of the Doom community didn't like it, which would result in there not being a new Doom game for a really long time, probably longer than anybody would have thought a game like Doom 3 could have influenced. But it wouldn't be until 2016's Doom reboot revival that has kind of continued on now with Doom Eternal and that new Dark Ages game that looks pretty cool. Doom was kind of just out of the spotlight for a while. And while it seems like a lot of people didn't like Doom 3, somebody liked Doom 3 a lot.
Me. I like Doom 3 a lot. And I don't know, I thought the whole Doom setting was just cool for like a more spooky vibe.
I don't know if people thought Doom was just dead in the water during that long hiatus. Was there ever talks of a Doom 4 beforehand? I'm sure there was rumors, but...
Oh yeah, there was rumors of Doom 4 all the time.
But I don't know if they ever actually were taken serious until obviously we finally got the Doom 2016.
I have to double check this, but I think there was canceled plans for Doom 4 that fell in the water after Doom 3.
Probably direct result of Doom 3.
Right. And I think there was people that left after Doom 3, and it was just bad. It was just a bad state for the franchise.
We've talked about Tony Hawk on this channel before. We've done a dedicated video on Tony Hawk, and some of you probably already know I'm not really a fan of Tony Hawk Pro Skater 5, which essentially was a game that was made mostly because of a licensing agreement that was going to expire with Tony Hawk's name use or whatever. So they had to pump out a game real quick. They had a studio that wasn't really the best studio to be working on making a brand new Tony Hawk game, and they kind of just threw some stuff together, threw it out there in a very unfinished state. I think the game wasn't even fully there on day one. I mean, there's some conflicting reports on what was actually on the disc day one, and then there was a day one patch that ended up adding in the rest of the content. There was just one level in the base game before the patch. It was just a wild ride, and Tony Hawk, I think the game series at least died that day, not the skater.
Wait, Tony died?
And they didn't kill him personally, but
they executed him publicly because the game was
oh my god. Tony Hawk was already, the series was already dying off for a while. I think it was just franchise fatigue. There was a lot of Tony Hawk games coming out every single year, and then there was other games coming out that were kind of cool though, like Skate and stuff. So, they kind of had to try to dance around that, but they thought they had something with Tony Hawk Pro Skater 5. There wasn't any real competition that year. It could have been an easy slam dunk, and they missed. And that was it for Tony Hawk for a while, until they did the Pro Skater 1 and 2, and that was kind of cool. I think a lot of people like that. And then they canceled plans for Pro Skater 3 and 4 because they needed the developer studio to go work on Call of Duty Black Ops Cold War.
I guess that makes more money.
Yes, yeah, Call of Duty made more money. So rest in peace, Tony Hawk. It's dead again for now. It died on a positive note rather than dying on a Tony Hawk Pro Skater 5 type of note. Now, while this video mostly focuses on game series that almost died due to like one game being pretty bad, there is one other game I kind of want to mention here, which is Metroid Other M. Because, you know, Nintendo can kind of get away with having bad games and not necessarily have to like kill the franchise off altogether, like, you know. But Metroid was like a beloved Nintendo staple for a really, really long time, and it would iterate and do something new. Sometimes there'd be little breaks, like we didn't have a main Metroid game on Nintendo 64, we just had Samus show up on Smash Bros. And that was it. But then the GameCube brought in Metroid Prime, and Metroid Prime, Prime 2, and Prime 3 all would be like pretty big hits for Metroid, like making the jump to first person. Woo! There's some DS games like Metroid Prime Hunters and whatnot, like woo! But after Metroid Prime 3, which was still pretty well received, you know, they wanted to do something different. So Metroid Other M, which would be like a new, I don't know what you would call this, reboot to the Metroid series, would begin here, and the gameplay would be quite a bit different than the previous well-liked first-person Metroid games, this time taking on the third-person perspective, and you have to use the Wiimote to control, and there's like melee combat. Okay, I mean, the game wasn't bad necessarily. It was okay, but the thing about Metroid Other M was they already had like a great formula going with the first-person stuff. People really enjoyed those games. It was atmospheric, it was a little darker, it had an interesting world, and Metroid Other M kind of took away some of that feeling with the first-person vibe by letting us have this third-person vibe. And then the story is just like a lot. I mean, it is a lot. Like the Metroid games aren't known for having like a story necessarily. It's more like storytelling through world building and exploration. And Metroid Other M straight up has a story. And I remember playing this game a little bit back in the day, and I remember a few things. Samus talks to this guy. I think his name was like Adam or Andrew or Alex or something like that. And they talk a lot. And there's just kind of a lot to take in. I don't know. I'm sure there's people that love Metroid Other M. But this game definitely did not do well enough where Nintendo's like, let's do Metroid Other M, the sequel. Metroid Other M did end up becoming a commercial success still. I mean, it's a Metroid game. And like I said, people mostly didn't hate the game. It definitely scored a little bit lower than I think what Nintendo would want for a game like this. And one of the biggest things about Other M was probably the fact that a lot of the community that was like hardcore Metroid fans kind of were vocal online about not really liking the game too much or not liking the direction that Metroid was moving in. You know, in 2022, the former president of Nintendo America, Reggie Fils-Aimé, actually talked directly about Other M, saying that he really thought it was going to be a defining moment for the Metroid franchise. It was giving much more of a perspective about Samus, and he really thought it was going to be a killer moment for the franchise's history, and it wasn't. It didn't deliver. Not the business results. It really didn't touch the players the way that they had hoped. And I think that was a pretty big blow for Nintendo. I think they thought that they were doing something big here with Metroid. Like, this was their Halo killer, and it was time. I mean, it wasn't really, it was a third-person game. It wasn't really a Halo killer, but it was their sci-fi adventure game that people were going to be hyped about. And yeah, this resulted in Metroid being just wiped out of Nintendo's arsenal for years and years. In 2016, Metroid would kind of come back in a spin-off form with Metroid Prime Federation Force, which was confusing already because why are they bringing the Metroid Prime thing back? I thought Metroid Prime ended with Metroid Prime 3, and then they did Other M, which was like a reboot. So how is Prime not dead anymore if they're calling the new 3DS game Metroid Prime Federation Force? What? In 2017, we would eventually get a new Metroid game, but this was after a pretty long hiatus, and it was just a remake of the 1991 game Metroid 2 Return of Samus. And it wouldn't be until 2021 when we'd finally get a mainline Metroid game, not in the form of Metroid Prime 4, which was announced alongside like a bunch of the big Switch lineups early on in the Switch's life, but Metroid Dread, which kind of went back to the whole side-scrolling thing, but it was pretty competent, and I think people really liked it. So good win for Nintendo. Metroid Prime 4 has had development restarted once, somewhere like halfway through the line, and now we finally got gameplay footage of it, so it looks like Metroid is back. But it took Nintendo a while to kind of right the ship after Metroid's Other M adventure. That was something.
XCOM was a hugely successful franchise in the 90s, selling like 600,000 100,000 copies with the first game, which in like the mid 90s is an insane number. Like there was nothing like it. Like this was a top tier strategy game at the time. And for the first 4 games, they did really well. You know, the games were polished, high ratings, good sales. And then Hasbro bought it in the late 90s. And we know Hasbro is a toy company and not a video game company. So they made some weird decisions, like release a play-by-mail game where you had to mail in some stuff to play the game. And then also they made a 3D shooter spin-off that everybody hated and was really bad. And the franchise just died right there and wouldn't be revived until 2012 when 2K, who had the rights by then, said, you know, let's try again. Let's make it again. And since then, it's been hugely successful again. But it's just a really weird thing. And Forza was so bad that they canceled 2 more sequels that were planned, and the franchise was just dormant until 2012. So we got an 11-year hiatus. So in 2003, Tomb Raider was a yearly franchise. Every single year there was a new Tomb Raider game. You could count on it. They've been going on for like 7 or 8 years at that point, I think. And Angel of Darkness was so bad and so unfinished that it broke that cycle of yearly releases. And actually the reason that game came out earlier than it should be and was so unfinished is because there was a Tomb Raider movie coming out the same year. And they were like, hey, we can get free marketing if we release at the same time as the Tomb Raider movie. So then they pushed the release way earlier than it should have released. The developer that did the original Tomb Raider games completely fell apart and closed down a couple years later, and there wouldn't be a Tomb Raider game for 3 years. And it was just like this time of uncertainty, people thinking like, oh, we'll never see a Tomb Raider game again. And then they did the Legend trilogy, and then there was another break for a while. Then eventually there was a reboot under Crystal Dynamics, and I mean the franchise is back since then and has been getting some pretty solid games since then. But Angel of Darkness definitely was a low point that put Tomb Raider into this limbo of where, you know, you weren't sure if there was another game for a while.
Do you think they're gonna keep making movies? They did a Tomb Raider movie not that long ago, and at the end, they tease another movie.
You know, I watched part of that movie, and that movie was kind of boring.
Kind of boring. I watched it too.
A little interesting fact about Angel of Darkness, there is a Tomb Raider collection coming out next year that will include Angel of Darkness.
Tomb Raider's still alive to an extent now. I mean, the reboot series wrapped up, and now they've been doing the re-releases. They did the first 3, and then the back 3 are coming out, right? Mm-hmm. So, something. I don't think Tomb Raider's going to die anytime soon, but I do think after Angel of Darkness, they're like, we need to reevaluate what we're doing with Tomb Raider overall. Speaking of like movie video game tie-ins, we have 007 Legends, which was kind of the end of an era where James Bond games were regularly being made. There were a lot of Bond games made by a lot of different studios over the years. The best ones were easily GoldenEye for the N64, and that's it. I'm joking. I mean, Nightfire was good too. But 007 Legends wasn't it. And I think a lot of fans just didn't like it. It felt like a mediocre first-person shooter. And it was supposed to be this like huge, like encompassing celebration of the franchise history. And it felt very watered down. It didn't feel like what you would expect for something called 007 Legends.
It felt like a Call of Duty clone.
Barely. A bad Call of Duty clone?
Dude, it's like Homefront.
Yeah, it was something. I don't know. This put the James Bond, a lot of the James Bond releases on ice. They stopped doing a lot of things. And there were some cool ideas that did come out prior to 007 Legends. I mean, they did the GoldenEye reimagined or whatever you want to call it. And they did like, I think there was like some tie-ins for like the Daniel Craig games. Daniel Craig movies in game mode. And James Bond's pretty much been dormant since we will be seeing eventually what the Hitman studio can do with the 007 IP, because they've gotten the rights for that now. So we'll have to see how that ends up going. So maybe we'll see 007 back, but it's been dead for over 10 years at this point. So hopefully the Hitman developers can salvage this in some way.
I'm very excited for Project 007 though, because the Hitman games are bangers.
The newer Hitman games are kind of lit. So I think they could come up with something. They can cook.
I gotta say, like, not often is like a reboot actually better than the original games. I think Hitman 2016 and onward is better than the original Hitman games in my opinion. You ever heard of the game Yakuza Dead Souls?
No.
It is a spin-off of Yakuza that was supposed to, you know, hop on the zombie hype train back in the day.
I thought the Yakuza games were like a fighting game series.
Right, they are. And Dead Souls is a non-canon spin-off where you shoot zombies, which already is a pretty weird departure. But they did some weird spin-offs before that, like in, you know, ancient Japanese times and stuff like that, right? So like...
Don't they have a pirate game coming out?
They have a pirate game coming out, so they've been doing weird stuff. They're known for that. Yakuza, obviously being a Japanese franchise, hugely popular in Japan, not as popular in the West, was kind of in this weird limbo of it, Yakuza Dead Souls, because Dead Souls sold so badly in the West, they were hesitant to release future games in the West after Dead Souls. And obviously the franchise didn't die in Japan, but for years they didn't release the game in the West anymore. And there was multiple spin-offs and mainline games that didn't come out in the West ever, or even the mainline games took like 3 or 4 years before they would release for a long time. And Yakuza Dead Souls released in 2011, and it wouldn't be until 2017 when the mainline games would release in the West again, kind of simultaneously to Japan, or like at least within the year that they would release in Japan. Yakuza 5, which was the next mainline game after Dead Souls, did not come out into the West until 2015 when releasing in Japan in 2012. And it was only after fans and Sony were like, maybe we should bring it to the West, that it finally started coming back. But for a while, Dead Souls killed off Yakuza in the West.
I didn't even know Yakuza existed, honestly, until the Xbox eventually got them years later.
Right, that makes sense. So you were an Xbox 360 kid.
Yeah, I was a 360 kid. Darn, I should have held on to my Sony systems. Too bad I sold that PlayStation 4 with the Silent Hill PT demo on it.
Yeah, I mean, hey, didn't you pay off your college loan from that or something?
Yep, definitely. Speaking of Silent Hill, Silent Hill Book of Memories. Do you want to talk about that? I see it on our list here.
It is a PS Vita spinoff that was not that good. And I mean, they already were kind of going down with the Silent Hill franchise. Obviously, there was you remember that game that came out on the 360, what was it called? I forgot the name. Homecoming, right? That already wasn't that well received. That came out like in 2008. You know, kind of after that, they tried a little other things. They released the HD collection. It just kind of was weird. Then Book of Memories came out. It was just bad. People were just over Silent Hill at that time. Then PT looked like it would be a great game, and obviously the demo was hugely hyped. And I don't know, Hideo Kojima, Norman Reedus, it just looked like it was gonna be a banger. But then obviously that whole falling out happened that we talked about earlier, and that was canceled. And then it just lay dormant for 10 years until we got the Silent Hill 2 remake this year. And now we're finally getting new Silent Hill stuff, but for almost 10 years. Silent Hill just died.
Wait, did they go straight to remaking Silent Hill 2 when they did the remakes? They didn't do Silent Hill 1?
Yeah.
What about Silent Hill 1? Are they going to remake that?
I don't know.
Silent Hill 2, the better one? I've never played Silent Hill.
Silent Hill 2 is definitely the iconic one, the story and stuff, yeah.
A game series I have played that's not Silent Hill, Spyro the Dragon. I had that written down. We could talk about Crash 2 a little bit, but Crash has had a little bit of an easier time than Spyro has. I mean, Spyro was, a mascot for PlayStation for a long time, and then after Insomniac Games stopped making the Spyro games, things went downhill quickly. Then they rebooted the series as something completely different. I think they had Elijah Wood voicing him for a while. I know that face you made is how everyone felt when that was announced. Some people liked those games. I think they don't hold up as well as maybe some kids remember. They might have some nostalgia with that. And then they did some stuff. They threw it on the DS. They tried to do a few things. Honestly, it was going downhill for a while. And then they were like, you know what? Skylanders is the future of Spyro. They just made a completely different series and threw the mascot Spyro, redesigned him in a worse way, threw him in there. And then after Skylanders had been out for like a year, they like sidelined him as one of the characters too, even. So he had it rough. And after that, there was nothing Spyro related because he was like fully ingrained in the Skylanders universe. So like, why would they need to do anything with Spyro? Eventually, we did get a Spyro remastered trilogy, which was really, really good, meaning that Spyro would live once again. Still haven't gotten Spyro 4 though. And I don't know if we will. It was heavily rumored for a long time that a Spyro the Dragon 4 was being worked on, similar to how Crash Bandicoot got its Crash Bandicoot 4. But I don't think Crash 4 ended up selling well enough, I think, for Activision to want to go ahead and greenlight a Spyro 4 standalone game. Though at least Spyro shows up from time to time. He was in Crash Team Racing, which is something like the newer one.
Crash Bandicoot 4 sold worse than the trilogy that they released like the year prior.
Which makes sense because of nostalgia. I don't know what they were expecting.
It's true. And then, are you getting to Crash Team Rumble?
Because no, that was it.
Okay. I think Crash Team Rumble is going to, put a coffin or a nail in the coffin again for the Crash franchise.
I think Crash is going to be on this list of series if we looked back in like 5 years. I don't know how much more we're going to see from Crash now. They're really just trying to do everything they can to milk Crash, and Team Rumble, not sure if that was the play. not going free to play was a little crazy. Here's a question. Do you know, is Spyro in Crash Rumble? They put him in everything else. So I'm like, would he show up there too?
They do have that microtransaction store, so maybe they added him later on as a skin.
So I don't know for sure everything, but apparently in season 3, which was in December of 2023, they did a entire season themed around Spyro the Dragon. So yeah, he is in the game. He is a new hero in the game. So Spyro lives on, barely, in the Crash universe.
Hanging on by a thread.
Similar to other characters that have kind of fallen by the wayside that we didn't fully get to talk about. I mean, we could have talked about like Banjo-Kazooie. Blinks. I think Blinks is actually fully dead. I think Banjo, other than Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, I think, I don't know if Microsoft has any intentions of doing something in the immediate future with Banjo or Conquer. Maybe. I don't know how the rights... I guess they could do a remake. I guess they did the remake with Conquer, so... as long as they don't do the whole like Project Sparks thing with Conquer and they do the whole... that other redesign thing they did with like HoloLens. Do you remember that?
Young Conquer, yeah.
They did Young Conquer, dude. Crazy times. Microsoft should be banned from everything.
Making games, yeah. They should just focus on Office. Just make Office.
No more Microsoft Office programs.
So, WWE 2K20 didn't kill the franchise necessarily, but something happened that I've never seen with a sports game. So whenever Madden, FIFA, any of those sports games, 2K, NBA 2K come out, they're like yearly. No matter how bad they are, the next year there will be another sports game of the same type, right? It's been like that for, I don't know, since the dawn of time. And 2K20 was so bad that they stopped making these 2K games for 2 years. And that's something I've never seen before. And I thought it was really unique. And I don't know when else I would bring this up. But they reevaluated their development cycle, I guess, and paused making the yearly sports game for a while.
That's interesting. We've seen that happen a couple of times with other series. But it's always interesting when something like has a long track record of being yearly and then abruptly stops. Assassin's Creed did it, I think, before Origins came out.
True.
They took like a year off, but they were like cooking themselves with how much they're releasing those types of games. So it's always interesting whenever that type of stuff comes up. There was one other game that I wasn't 100% sure if we should count it, but I want to count it here. But Harvest Moon has been such a weird tale. So Harvest Moon originally back in the day had like its main group of developers, all that, but they didn't own the rights to the name Harvest Moon. So for whatever reason, when deals went south, the developers would leave and not be able to take the Harvest Moon name with them. So the owners of the Harvest Moon name would license some other studio to make like a quick buck and throw Harvest Moon on, some farm game that's not very good, while the actual developers would go on to make remakes of Harvest Moon, but then they couldn't call it Harvest Moon. So they had to call it Story of Seasons. And I just think that that's very interesting because there's a very easy line you could see wherever the Harvest Moon games got really, really bad. And it's because the original team isn't allowed to work on it, and they're the ones that are making competent, follow-up games to the Harvest Moon series with just a completely different name. And there's something kind of interesting I want to throw in there as well.
Yeah, it's very unique. I mean, I can't think of another example like this where the original developer is still making the same game just under a different name. Usually the developer gets close and they never get to make a game again when a franchise like this gets transferred, right?
Right. Or especially weird to see like the name change and they can't use the original name for the title of the remake of the original game.
For a long time, I would see Story of Seasons on like the Steam store or whatever, and I was, this kind of looks like Harvest Moon back in the day.
It's a Harvest Moon ripoff. What is this?
This is Harvest Moon ripoff, but I guess it's original team, yeah. I didn't know until whenever we started making these videos like a year or two ago.
Yeah, no, I think that's something kind of fascinating. But I feel like we had a solid list here today. What did you think about it?
Yeah, no, I think this is a fun topic because, I don't know, these are like little unique tales that we get to highlight here.
Yeah, if there's any we missed, and I'm sure there's a lot of games that are fallen into this, leave the story in the comments down below. We'll look into it. Maybe it's a talking point for a future video that might have a similar subject matter or something. But yeah, huge thanks to our patrons for supporting our channel and our channel members. We really like you guys. We appreciate you guys. You guys let us do the little like talking section at the end of these videos, so that's cool. And if you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you're subscribed. That helps us a lot, especially if you're on like a television watching this, because we do long form content. So picking up the controller, hitting the subscribe button. I know it's a couple extra steps, but it does help us. Otherwise, that's it, I think. We'll see you guys next week with something brand new.
Yes.
All right. See you guys.
Bye-bye.